Hey guys, before this video starts, I just want to say thank you guys so much for 200 subscribers. The recent support on this channel has been amazing and I really appreciate it, so thank you. I also want to take this time to let you know that I have a Patreon and a Discord server in the works, so please leave a comment below about what you would like to see as rewards for the Patreon or channels for the Discord, so I can try to make it a little more worthwhile and what you guys would want. It's really just a way I can continue making awesome tutorial for you guys and provide a little extra content for Patreon exclusives. But anyway guys, I hope you enjoy the video. Hey guys, this is Jacob Zirkle, and today we're going to be talking about some fluid dynamics and physics inside of Blender, so let's go ahead and get started. Now this is a beginner tutorial, so I will be doing more advanced versions of this, so please like and subscribe for that. But anyway, let's go ahead and get started with the default scene. We have this cube. I'm just going to go ahead and move it up, and one of the quickest ways to actually start our water simulation was we can actually hit the F3 key and then type in quick liquid right here, and we can just go ahead and tap that and it will set up a liquid scene already. So as you can see, it's created another object. This is the domain right here. And then of course we have the actual liquid, which is in the box here. If we come over to the actual physics tab, we can see that there are different properties for each of the objects. For the cube object, you can already see that we have a fluid property already on it. It is a flow type, and the flow type is liquid, and it's coming out of the geometry. If you wanted it to be like a faucet and continuously pump water or any liquid out, you can actually change that into inflow, but for now we're going to leave it to geometry. The only other thing worth noting here is the initial velocity. If you wanted the water to have initial velocity when it first spawns in, whether that be up, down, left, or right, or anywhere in between, you want to make sure this is checked, but for now we're just going to leave that unchecked because I just want the gravity to be affecting our cube. So if we select this domain object now, we can see that it also has this fluid category selected, but instead of it being a flow, it's actually a domain. So basically any fluid physics that we do are going to be contained in this little box right here. Okay, so there are a bunch of settings down here. Instead of me just explaining it all at once, I'm going to kind of walk you through kind of a basic little setup right here. And so I'm just going to go ahead and increase the size of the domain a little bit so we have a little more room to work around with. Just going to make this be on the floor as best as I can. And then we can kind of position the cube inside wherever we want. I'm just going to make mine off to the left right here. And so now we can actually come back to the domain and mess around with some settings in there. Okay, the first one is the resolution divisions, and that's actually how detailed the simulation is going to be. By default it's on 32, which is not really that intensive. The more you do it, the longer it's going to take to actually bake and then render, so just keep that in mind. For the sake of this part of this tutorial, I'm going to leave it on 32, but later we will be increasing that. Next, coming on down to the time scale, the default is 1. But we're actually going to change that down to a 0.6. I find that 0.6 kind of matches real life motion a little bit better. 1 is a little too fast for our liking. So now we're just going to skip all these other settings. These are more for advanced simulations, and we really won't be covering that in this video. Now coming down to border collisions. This is basically just telling Blender which sides of this little domain are going to actually bounce water off and which are actually going to let water pass through. Thus like destroying some particles. So if you have a lot of particles in the scene, it might actually be smart to uncheck some of these boxes to try to limit the number of particles that are on screen. Next we actually have the liquid settings itself. There are a lot of stuff right here that we don't really have to mess around with. The only two that I would keep in mind is the sampling right here and the randomness. The sampling is how many particles are actually going to be in the cube or whatever your object is at one time. And so default it's 2, but later we'll be increasing that. And then the randomness is how they're spread out in the actual object when they spawn. Do you want it to be kind of a singular stream, or do you want the particles to be randomly placed so it's more chaotic? Coming down here we can see some other important menus. We have the diffusion menu, which you can set your viscosity and some surface tension and stuff like that. We're not going to be dealing with that in this beginner tutorial. You can also have particles. This is a new thing for Blender. Spray, foam, and bubbles. Basically these just make different particle systems inside the water itself. That'll be for the more advanced tutorial, so make sure to like and subscribe for that. Coming on down to the mesh section, this is actually important for this. we're going to go ahead and check this. Basically, once Blender bakes all the information of the actual particles and the water moving around, we'll need to bake it into a mesh so we can actually see the water in the viewport. So coming on down here, we have the cache menu. The important things here is to just see the type and the start and the end frame. We're actually going to set the end frame to be 100 just so we have a little more time to actually see the simulation. But the type is really important because that will let you actually bake the data and view the data. So replay is more for actually viewing in the viewport. But if you actually want to bake and do a final render, you want to change it to molecular or final. Okay, let's go ahead and get started in our beginner scene right now. The only thing I have changed so far is the time scale to a 0.6, and all the other values are the same as the default ones. Okay, so the only really settings I'm going to change for the domain are coming down here to the liquid section. I'm going to go ahead and set the sampling to a 4 just so we have a little more particles and stuff, and you'll notice it actually changed it right here. Don't really worry about that yet. And then I'm just going to increase the randomness a bit, just a 0.7 is fine. Now coming down to the cache section right here, we're going to make sure that it's on modular, and that will actually be for our final bake. And now if you come up here, you'll see that two more options have popped up. We have the bake data button right here, and in the mesh section we also have a bake mesh button here. So this is really the key type that you want to be in whenever you're baking data for actual fluid simulations. One more thing that we're going to do before we bake the data is to actually add a collision object. And so we're just going to add another mesh cube in the center right here. Just going to scale it up. And then we can actually come over to the physics properties and then add a fluid. And we're going to make this an effector. Basically, this just means that this object will act as a collision for any of the particles so they won't pass through it. Okay, now that we have our scene set up, we're actually going to go up here and select the domain and then hit the bake data button to actually have Blender start baking in the data. Once that is done, we can see that there are now some blue particles and stuff in here. And if we just kind of scrub through our timeline, you can see that a bunch of particles fall in the actual domain itself, and you can kind of get a nice little preview of whatever the simulation has baked and everything. And you'll notice that if we come to the top here, none of the particles are passing through this collision object, so everything is looking good. Now we actually have to bake in the mesh to actually see the water in its final form. To do that, just come all the way down to this mesh menu right here, and then we want the upres factor to be 2. Basically, the upres factor just multiplies whatever number is in here times the resolution divisions just for the mesh. And so if you're doing a final render and stuff, you want to make sure that this is as high as you can handle it. Again, it will make your baking times a lot higher, so just keep that in mind. But for the sake of this tutorial, I'm just going to leave it on the default value of 2. So now let's just hit the bake mesh, and you'll see that it has started to calculate the mesh. Once that is done, you can actually see that the domain itself has disappeared and been replaced by this little mesh of the actual water itself. So now we can go into solid view just to see that a little bit better, and we can actually see that the water is moving around and behaving like actual fluid. Okay, giving this a little play right now, we can see exactly what the simulation looks like. You can see that there is a border around here, and that is actually following our domain. So if you wanted the simulation to be a little bit larger, just adjust the size of the domain. Just keep in mind that that will take longer to bake and render. So now if we actually come to the camera mode, we're going to go ahead and move our camera by hitting N, go to view, lock camera to view, and just kind of moving that around like this, and then just deselecting that whenever we're done. Now let's actually view it. I'm just going to go ahead and go to the rendered view, come to the render engine and set it to cycles GPU compute. And then I'm going to turn the viewport denoising on and adaptive sampling on. And we can kind of see already the texture that Blender created for the actual domain right here. It kind of resembles a water texture. I'm just going to quickly set up an HDRI so we can see it better. So coming up to the shading tab, going to world, just going to quickly set up an environment texture nodes and then hook up a HDRI image. You can find those on hdrihaven.com if you ever want those. And so now with this, let's go back to the rendered view, and now we can see this a lot better. I'm just going to turn it to transparent so we can only see the water. But yeah, as you can see, it adds a default material to it. If we actually come up to the shading tab, we can actually view that material right here. So it has created a volume absorption node and a glass BSDF. These are the correct settings if you want water in the scene, with the IQR and the color and everything. Of course, depending on what fluid you are making, you can change the things around in here. Say if you wanted like a wine kind of texture like that or something like that, you could do something like that. Just kind of play around with it. But for water and for this tutorial, this is what we're going to keep. Okay, so now if I just come back over to layout view, let's go ahead and render a image. I'm just going to quickly make a plane real quick on the ground. Just set this up to the water like that. And so let's go ahead and give this a quick little view in the render. Okay, so this is what the water looks like in the actual rendered view. We can notice that the actual cube is still in the scene, and to get rid of that we can just come over here, come up to these little tabs up here and check mark both the kind of monitor view and the camera view, and then we're just gonna come up here, select our cube, and then just come up here. We can hide this in all these layers, and so now if we give it another render, we will now notice that the cube is no longer up here. So that's just an easy non-destructive way to get rid of the emitter object. Okay, so those are the basics of fluid simulation in Blender. Let's go ahead and do a more advanced scene so we can kind of get a better idea of how fluid works in Blender. Okay, to start, I'm just going to go ahead and delete everything besides the camera. So the plane, the water, the effector, and then also we're going to grab the cube up here and then just go ahead and delete that as well. We're just going to go ahead and make another cube right here, and then just go to the side view and make, again, hit F3 to do quick liquid. And then we're just going to mess around with the domain a little bit and just make it a little bit larger and taller like this, maybe a little bit wider. That's looking good. I'm just going to move this up so it's on the ground, and then going to move this cube up here to be kind of in the, let's see, the back left corner. Okay, so now that we have that, we're actually going to make a little obstacle course for the fluid to actually go through. And so we're just going to make a quick cube right here, bring this up, and then we're just going to make that a little bit bigger, scale it on the y-axis, and maybe a little bit on the z like that, just so we have a nice block, and make sure it does go outside of the domain so it affects all of the particles inside the domain. Okay, now coming to the side view, we're just going to play around and position some of these cubes around. And so I'm going to hit Alt D to create an instance of this object, kind of just move these around. Again, just Alt D. You can really form any path you want. I'm kind of just messing around and playing with the slopes and everything, so I think this is looking good. Again, they all need to be outside of the domain like that, so we get all the particles. So now we're actually going to set these as the fluid effectors. So just again hit fluid right here, then the type be an effector. You just want to do that for all of these objects that we just created. With that now set up, we're going to go click on this right here. And so this time, instead of doing the geometry, we actually want to do inflow. And like I said before, that will just constantly push water or any liquid you're doing out of the object itself. And so we're gonna come to the first frame of the animation, and then we can see this little button that says use flow right here, and that will actually determine if the flow is being turned on or off. So right now it is on, and so we're gonna hit a keyframe right here to make sure that it stays on. Then I'm gonna jump ahead a little bit to frame 15, I think, then turn it off, and then press the keyframe button right here. Now let's play around with some initial velocity. So we're going to come over here and check mark initial velocity, and we're going to make it go into this cube up here. And so to do that, we're going to make it go on the x-axis, positive on the x because it's going this way to the right. So I think that, a 0.5 maybe. Then coming over to the y-axis side, we're going to need it to go to the negative because it's going to the left. And so I think a negative 0.3 is going to do it for that. Now just to note, you can also do it in the z direction if you wanted the water to go up or down. Okay, let's actually view what that looks like before we start baking. And so to do that, we can go to the domain and then come down here to the cache and then set the type to be modular. And then we're going to set it back to replay. That just refreshes the cache for replay. So now that we have it on replay, we can actually see the particles in its unbaked form. And we notice that they are affected by these effectors right here, but there aren't really that many particles, and so to change that, we're actually going to come make sure domain is selected and then come up here to the settings section, and then we can leave all these other settings alone. Coming down to the liquid section, I'm going to go ahead and again change this to a 4 sampling, and then just make the randomness up a bit. I'm going to set mine to 2. And now coming down here, we can go ahead and set the type to modular, and then set the mesh, check that on. And then we don't really have to do anything with mesh yet because we need to bake the data first. And so to do that, we're just going to come up here and then hit the bake data. I actually just realized that we had some other settings that we needed to do. So to cancel the bake before it's done, you can always hit escape, and that'll stop it. The nice thing about the new system that Blender has is that you can actually resume the bake or free it. Freeing just means to start over. But in the past, you wouldn't have the option to resume. It would always just be you have to start over if you make a mistake. And so that's a really nice thing that Blender now has. And so now, instead of hitting any of these buttons, we can come down here to the bottom and actually set our end frame to be, I think 150 is a good place to end it. And then we can come back up and hit resume, and it will resume the bake from where it left off. Okay, so now that the data is baked, let's make sure to view it before we start baking the mesh and making sure everything is alright. And we can see that it looks pretty good. I just wanted a lot of movement around and kind of make the water bounce off the other objects and stuff. And so this is perfect for what I need it for. If it is not for any reason, you can always come over here to the free data button and change around some more settings and then rebake it. But you do want to make sure that you like the motion and everything before you bake in the mesh. So because I like it, I'm going to come down here to the mesh section. The upres factor, I'm actually going to change that to 4. This means that it'll just multiply the resolution divisions, which is 64, times this number, which is 4. Thus, it'll be 256, which will give us a very smooth mesh. And so finally, we're just going to come down here and bake the mesh itself. This should take a little bit, depending on your resolution size and everything. So just let this bake. You can even let it bake overnight. Okay, so now the mesh is actually in our viewport itself, and it is looking pretty sick. You will notice that some of the particles are very big, and this is just to do with your resolution size. To be honest, 64 is a very low number, so if you're doing anything very intensive, I would recommend a 128 or even a 256 for those really important scenes. Just a quick note, you can see that some of the liquid is actually going inside the effectors, and that again has to do with the resolution divisions. So a higher number means that less of the actual liquid will phase into the effectors. Okay, with this all set up now, I'm going to go ahead and set up our scene. Again, just going to go into the camera view, and then hitting N, I can come over to the view and lock camera to view, and then just get a pretty cool angle going right here. I'm going to press the home key to actually make it full screen so we can see, and then just trying to get a cool angle. I might actually just come to the side and just so we can see all the physics itself. And so something like this, I'm actually going to change it to be a square image like that. And so now, just unchecking the lock camera to view, we can actually view the full animation with the mesh baked in, and we can see what it looks like. So yeah, that is looking really cool. Again, I'm just going to select this cube and turn off all the visibility, so when we actually render, it's not going to affect it. Then let's just make sure our rendered actually looks pretty cool. And so this is the default kind of water shader. It is being affected by the HDRI I have in the scene. I'm just going to quickly add a mesh plane real quick, just so we can get some of that, and then maybe change around some materials right here. Basically just set up the scene however you like it. I'm just gonna make this have a red material, I think, like this, and since it was an instant, it changed all of them, so just a quick little tip right there. Okay, coming into the camera view, we can actually see that there is some clipping issues right here. So again, just to fix that, just select the camera, go into the camera properties, and in the clip start and end, we're just going to increase the end until we get everything in the actual view itself. I'm just going to go ahead and set up some render settings, and we can see what the final result looks like. Here's a quick look at my render settings. We have this node set up for the actual compositing in the compositing tab. To get this denoise with all these little sockets in here, you just want to come to the view layer properties and make sure denoising data is turned on. If you just want to pause and copy all these output settings, they are right in the corner right here. The final thing, if we just come up to the render settings, we can see that I'm rendering at 32 samples. I have transparent on the film, and then color management set to filmic. Okay guys, on the screen right now is our final result that we got for this tutorial. Again, this is kind of a beginner tutorial, so I just kind of wanted to walk through some of the settings that you'll constantly use when doing fluid simulation. But anyway guys, I am going to do a more advanced tutorial coming up here soon, so make sure you like and subscribe for that. But anyway, if you have any other tutorial ideas or any suggestions for this tutorial, anything I did wrong, or anything that you want to add, we're all trying to grow, so it's greatly appreciated. But anyway guys, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys later. Peace.